50. Okay, looks a little bit better. So if you're going to print out a report, just make sure that you have the appropriate number of lines. I think 55 lines. One other useful command you'll find in here is password. So if the user needs to change his or her password, type that in. Let's look at the official definition. Okay, so we say PASSW, that's the shortcut. And we specify our old password and then our new password. Okay, password changed. Notice that you can specify a username. That's only if you're logged in as a sysdba. So if you need to change someone's password, that's the quickest way to do it. The last thing we're going to cover in this nugget is iSQL+. iSQL+ is glorified SQL+. It's browser-based. What I find really nice about this tool is that we'll be able to run queries and not have to worry about all the formatting and line wrapping and all that ugly stuff that sometimes is time-consuming. The other really nice thing about this tool is that if you have users that are all over the place, they can just access the same database through their browser. So if they have any issues such as firewalls, security, it's a little bit easier through this tool. In order to access iSQL+ from a browser, you need to make sure that the HTTP daemon is running in the background. And so on the application server machine, which I have everything on one machine in my case, you're going to issue the iSQL+ control start command. And of course, to stop that server, you say stop instead of start. Okay, so we hit enter and it tells us that iSQL+ is started. Then you just open up a browser, you type in your host name. Since everything is on the same machine for me, I just type in localhost. If it's on a different machine, then you're going to either type in the IP address or the machine name, and you can do some ping testing. We'll talk about more details of networking later. And then the default port number is 5560. Now you might have this port number reserved for something else, but you can also always go into the configuration files and change it to some other number. Then /iSQL+, we hit enter, and it takes you to this login screen. So here it's prompting us for the username and password. And the connect identifier is used if the database is on a different machine from the HTTP server, or actually on a different machine from where you are. In this case, we don't need the connect identifier since everything is locally on our machine. And then we log in. It takes you to a window where you can execute your SQL statements, type them in, and just hit the execute button. Once you execute it, you might have to scroll down a little bit to see your results. So there we go. Notice how we didn't have to worry about any of the lines wrapping. They will never wrap. Let me show you another example. Here we're querying a table that has a lot of columns in it. We go ahead and execute it and see how here's all of our results. We might have to scroll over to the right a little bit, but here we didn't have to worry about any of the lines wrapping. And take a look at this. Up in the right-hand corner, we've got history. Here's a history of all your commands. So see, in iSQL+, we can have more than one item in your buffer, which you can't do in regular SQL+. So this is what I really like. Now let's talk about configuring that port number. If we can't use port 5560, we want to use something else, let's say 4499 or whatever number you like, we can do that quite easily. Right now I'm currently in my Oracle home directory, and we're going to navigate to the directory that contains our configuration file. So we go to our OC4J, J2EE, iSQL+ config directory, and there you will see http website.xml. We can go ahead and edit that with a simple notepad or whatever editor you like. And we do a search for the number 5560 or whatever the last port number was used. Okay, there it is. This is where we can change it. Let's change it to 4499 and save it. Notice how I stopped our HTTP server using iSQL+ control stop, and then we can issue the start command. Then when you launch your browser, just make sure you put the proper port number up there. If you don't want to mess around with putting any port number in there at all, port 80 is the default port. In other words, if you go to that configuration file, set it to 80, then you can simply type in localhost/SQL+. Now, to access iSQL Plus as the sysdba or as sysopper, you need to do the following steps. First of all, you're going to create users for the iSQL Plus DBA URL. And once you create that user and you grant them the appropriate role, in this case web DBA role, then when the user tries to access the web page, a little box will pop open prompting for their username and password. But for the server to see the changes that you've made, you actually have to bounce the server, and then of course you can access the web page. Notice that the URL is just slightly different. We've tacked on DBA at the end of the URL. So the first thing we're going to do here is make sure that we are in our Oracle Home, OC4J, J2EE, iSQL Plus, Application Deployments, iSQL Plus directory. It's really important that you execute these commands from this directory. It will not work otherwise. You also need to make sure that your Java home is set to your Oracle Home JDK directory, or you can have it point to some other Java home, at least as long as you've got, some version of Java that's 1.4 or higher. Then to create a user for our web page, we need to invoke what we call the JAZN shell. So I know this is a long command, bear with me. Here's our directory that we're in. We're going to execute Java. We're passing in the property of java.security.properties. And here we're passing in the value of OC4J, J2EE, home, config, jazn.security.props. Boy, that's long. Okay. Then we're actually going to be executing a jar file. That's what this next argument is. It's the jazn.jar. Then we're specifying a user. So here we're specifying that we're creating a user that's going to have DBA admin privileges. And then the password of welcome, that's actually the default password. You can use your shell to change that password. That's how we're going to execute the shell. And then the last argument is -shell. Okay, so here we go. We hit enter, and we are now in our JAZN shell. So from here, we can add users. If you want to see which users have the iSQL Plus DBA role, go ahead and type in list users. So see here, I created a couple users earlier. Now let's add another user. We're going to create user Joe, and his password will be cool guy. You want to see the users again? There's Joe. The next step is to grant Joe the proper privileges. So grant role web DBA, iSQL Plus DBA, and his name. Okay, remember to bounce our HTTP server. So let's exit out of this shell. Remember iSQL Plus, CTL, stop. Okay, and now we're going to go ahead and start it. And we should just be able to go to our browser and access it. So we typed in our URL up here, our host name, port number, iSQL Plus /DBA, and this is that box I was telling you about. So his name was Joe. We enter in his password, and we should get there. Here we go. So now we can log in sys as sysdba. So remember how I said sysdba is a special privilege? You actually have the two choices, sysdba or sysopper, and we'll talk about the differences of those later. Okay, so sys as sysdba, we type in his password and log in. Yay, we're in! Now we can do anything we want to the database. So you should feel pretty comfortable now connecting and disconnecting using SQL+, as well as using your editor shortcuts. Remember ED to launch your editor, A to append, C to change, and so on, as well as saving your evidence to a file, so spooling to a file. And hopefully you'll now modify your environment to make your personal settings more permanent. Okay, remember that environment variable called SQL path? Remember to modify that. Okay, as well as creating dynamic scripts using those variables that we talked about, And then last but not least, you should feel really comfortable using iSQL Plus. This is a wonderful tool. Okay. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.